welcome to this month's market update. I'm joined today by Philip Naylor, Principal Consultant and Head of the Capital Markets and Asset Allocation Team at Frontier Advisors. Hi, Phil.
Hi, Shahana.
So there's a lot happening globally, of course, Phil, but can you please talk us through how financial markets have performed over the last 1 month?
Yeah, thanks very much. It's been a busy time in markets as always. Over the last month or so, what we have seen is global equity markets rally. So we've seen, markets by and large up around 5% over the last month or so. Really, that's been driven by a change in pace from central banks. We've seen central banks still raising interest rates, but starting to show signs that the pace of hiking is starting to slow, and so expectations building that perhaps we're getting towards the end of the hiking cycle. So that's given markets some room to move on the upside. But to put that in perspective, we're still down 15% over the calendar year. So overall, still equity markets down for the year. Of course, we've seen heightened levels of inflation, central banks raising interest rates, some slowing in the global economy. So all of that has fed through into overall weakness in equity markets. But over the last month or so, we have seen some retracement there.
Thank you, Phil. And talking about policy, if we could just shift our focus to what's happening with COVID-19 related restrictions in China. We've seen a bit of movement around that recently.
Yeah, sure have. China's been one area in the global economy and in markets this year in general that's been moving around quite a lot. It's been a big focus. In general, like things like Chinese equities have declined materially this year. We've seen sort of ongoing increases in geopolitical tensions in China. We've seen a slowing in the Chinese economy. And then on top of that, we have seen towards the sort of the second half of this year, we have seen like a reasonable jump up in COVID-19 cases in China. That was met by authorities with pretty strict lockdown measures. So all of that was feeding into sentiment and why Chinese equities had been doing quite poorly. But again, kind of reflecting what we've seen in other markets globally, Chinese equities have done quite well over the last month because we have seen some of those COVID-19 cases start to ease. Off the back of protests in China, we've started to see authorities move and kind of relax some of those restrictions. So that's given markets some rooms to be, I'd put more, be less pessimistic than necessarily optimistic. But given that all the things that are going on in China, we have seen things like Chinese equities rally on the prospect of China starting to ease restrictions and open up a bit more.
And these signals of reopening have certainly come slightly ahead of what some of us, of when some of us would have expected. So that's a positive development as well. And Phil, once again, just shifting our focus a bit, can you provide some insights or talk us through what were the main takeaways for you from the recently concluded climate change conference, or what we know as the COP27?
Yeah, great. So we like climate change in general is a big kind of secular issue that we've been focused on for a while at Frontier in terms of thinking about investment. So we have seen, as I said, the COP27 meeting in Egypt recently. These meetings can be very, very important. We saw the Paris Agreement come out of a previous COP meeting. This meeting is somewhat as always. We've seen sort of a mixed reaction from experts in terms of the takeaways from the meeting. I think in general we didn't necessarily see a big ramp up in global ambitions in terms of actions to limit temperature increases. So in that regard, certainly there is a feeling that the meeting wasn't as successful as perhaps it could have been. Maybe the one area of optimism, there does seem to have been a shift in terms of acknowledgement around the funding required, particularly for emerging market economies in making the transition. It's an area that at Frontier we've been doing research on that really does highlight the difficulty that some of these countries are going to face, particularly like the developing economies in meeting carbon reduction target. So in that regard, that's sort of seen as kind of a positive change.
It's really interesting, Phil, and we can certainly hope that there's more progress made on that front over the next few years. Of course, you have touched on a variety of policy issues and challenges which will evolve, and it will be interesting to see how our growth evolves in response to that over the next few quarters.
Great.
We, of course, look forward to continuing to hear from you and receive your insights as we go through the next year. And thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. And thanks to the audience for joining us for this month's market update.